And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Jack and Elton from the That's So Craven podcast down in Australia. They're on to join me to preview the upcoming match for Fulham against Tottenham Hotspur Monday night at Craven Cottage. As always, as I say at the beginning of the show, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. And thank you, everyone who has watched and listened to all of the podcasts this month. I've been going a little nutty with bringing you content. I actually did not do anything yesterday, so I broke my streak. However, I have two podcasts for you today. One from a Fulham perspective with my guys here, and then another a little bit later on from a Tottenham perspective. So I got you two different ways previewing this upcoming match. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. And listen, I've mentioned to both of you, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. Jack, I just want to introduce you, then I'll go to Elton. Thank you so much for joining me, and tell everyone a little bit about you if they don't already know about That's So Craven.
Thanks, Russ. No, thanks for having us on. That's So Craven. We started up at the start of this season. We've been long-time Fulham fans. Grew up in the UK, just outside of London. So, Fulham fans for a very, very long time, back since the late 90s. Moved out to Australia and really struggled with finding any Fulham coverage. So, we've always listened to Cottage Talk, listened to Fulhamish, all the other great podcasts out there, and decided it was time for us to do something as well from Australia. So it's been really great so far. We're about 25 episodes deep so far this season, and just, loving it. So it's great to be part of the Fulham network online now.
Well, you're an integral part now of this network. So thank you for doing what you guys do. And Elton, welcome to the show. And as I said to Jack beforehand, I'm just so happy that you guys are doing it. We were talking a little bit about the lack of content around the world. You were mentioning in Australia. I can talk about the U.S. So I'm glad that this gives you guys a voice to talk amongst yourselves to a wider audience, but also give you the chance to show your voice.
Absolutely. And thanks very much, Russ, for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Jack may have mentioned, I'm not sure if you covered it just then, but we certainly listened to you. And as part of our little chat before we went live, we were just discussing, it's not so easy for Fulham fans to really get the in-depth stories and the coverage and the chat. So we love talking Fulham. Obviously, as you may or may not, some of you may or may not know, Jack and I are related. And Sam, who can't be with us tonight, is my other son. So, we spend we spend most of our life talking about Fulham anyway. So we thought we may as well record it.
That's great. I wasn't even aware of that. So you guys just told me something I was not aware of that. So
There you go.
that's fantastic. I just want to share a couple of comments. We have people watching us live. This is from Dean, just saying hello. And then, of course, Eddie, who's a huge supporter and listens to and watches all the episodes. Always room for a Fulham podcast. I subscribe to all of them. That's great to hear. And this is from my friend Steve, who is also a co-host on the show. Good day, guys, and happy Oz Day for the 26th. So, guys, we got a nice welcome here from the Fulham supporters. I'm sure we'll have other comments, and I'll share some of them if they come in. But thank you so much for joining me. And we're going to go for about a half hour, 45 minutes talking about this match. We're going to preview it. But before we do that, I told you guys beforehand, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I've done this on the transfer show that I've been doing, talking about who won the deal. And I also mentioned Ryan Sessegnon. We're going to talk a little bit about him as well. But I want to talk about some players in between both of these sides and who won the deal. And we could talk a little bit about how they worked out for Fulham, how they worked out for Tottenham. So, guys, in this segment of Who Won the Deal, we're going to start with a couple Fulham players. And I'm going to start with my favorite Fulham player of all time. He started at Tottenham, came to Fulham, Danny Murphy, Elton. So, in the end, Danny Murphy had a very short stint at Tottenham Hotspur, came to Fulham, became a captain, and I think a Fulham legend. Let's talk about Danny Murphy, starting at Liverpool, obviously, then goes to Tottenham. But I think Fulham are fortunate that they found their captain here.
Absolutely. I mean, Danny Murphy, obviously Fulham legend, and very much around the time that we started following Fulham pretty seriously. Jack was a young man in short pants at the time. And I think, what's not to love about Danny Murphy? Very passionate guy, huge influence inside the dressing room and on the pitch. If you're asking me who won the deal, definitely us.
It absolutely is. And Jack, it's funny because everyone asks me who's my favorite Fulham player of all time, and it's Danny Murphy. And I started following around the time that Murphy came to Fulham Football Club. So his arrival is key in my development as a Fulham supporter, and just someone that epitomizes the word captain for me. Fulham legend, everything you want to say. I think it's obvious Fulham won the deal because he was barely at Tottenham. But thoughts on Danny Murphy? Because I want to bring him up. I have not mentioned him in a long time. It's just someone that I don't think we talk enough about anymore. And we should keep talking about Danny Murphy and his influence.
The captain of the Great Escape, played through the Europa League run as well. Like, what more could you ask for? Put the ball into the box for the goal that kept us up. Scored the goal that kept us up. He's one of those guys who, like you said, he's going to be a Fulham legend because of those moments where he led the team forward. So we definitely won the deal there. He was obviously a great player at Liverpool as well, but he didn't fit into that Spurs side at the time, but perfectly fit into that Fulham side where we really needed someone who could sort of sit deep, just run the game. Kind of like what Tom Kenny does nowadays, where he doesn't have the speed, but he's got the ability with his feet to just change a game. And 100% we won that, 100%.
Okay, excellent. All right, guys. Here's another interesting one. And this one's a little bit loaded. Scott Parker. Elton, thoughts on Scott Parker? He came at a very difficult time for Fulham Football Club. And obviously, he played for Fulham, stayed with Fulham when they got relegated. And so this is an interesting one because the history with Scott Parker, I have a lot of respect for what Scott Parker did as a player and want to give him his due as a manager. Didn't work out in the end. I'm glad that he moved on. I'll just say that. But I'm curious. This is an interesting one. Who actually won the deal here?
It's very funny. It's one of those awkward moments whenever anyone mentions the word Scott Parker.
Right.
And it's unfortunate because, he had a very successful and celebrated international career. He's a very respected England footballer. He's a very respected Premier League footballer. It's one of those things that you just sort of think, really, should you really take it to the next step and become a manager? And so, look, I think he was a very handy and a well-loved player for Fulham.
Right.
That there's no, and I think his legacy in that regard is secure. And and I'm sure many people have got no problems with it. But there are two parts to this story, and not only that his management involvement is the most recent part of the history, but I think it's also sadly the most disappointing part of the story in terms of the involvement with Fulham. He definitely had some success. He took over from Ivanovic, took us back up into the Premier League, and managed to convince the Khans to spend a lot of money. Right?
This is true.
He was influential, and he came off the back of, people loved him at Spurs. He was very well thought of at Spurs as their under-18 manager. Yeah. And he was only there for a couple of years, and people were even mentioning his name for the top job before he came to Fulham, right? But if you look at overall, he's had some very short runs as managers, in recent times. And do I have to rate him overall as who won the deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think overall in his second coming, that wasn't a great move for Fulham.
Okay. Jack, you gave the thumbs down to anyone that's watching live, watching the video. So your thoughts on this transfer? It's funny because I remember at the time I'm like, wow, this is kind of a coup getting Scott Parker. And I think even a few seasons before that, I want to say he was Premier League Player of the Season with West Ham, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, possibly.
So,
I mean,
yes.
It's a tough one. I mean, I gave the thumbs down. Yeah, to be honest, if you actually look at it overall, it's probably I'd say we probably still did win the deal there. He came to us at a tough time when we got relegated, but actually stuck with us. And I think those first few seasons in the Championship, you are kind of crying out for players like that. And if we didn't have someone like Scott Parker, it could have been a lot worse, and we could have dropped even further. So,
yeah,
I think he was a great player. I think he was past his peak, way past his peak when he was playing for us, and he probably hung around a year or two too long. Should have retired earlier, but we kind of have to be glad that he didn't, because I think he did keep us up in a way in those couple of seasons. And then look, as a manager, he played some really boring football, but we did get some results under him as well, so we can't be too harsh on it. I think all in all, it's good that we have had him around the club, so we did win the deal, but I don't really want him back.
Okay.
No offense, Scott.
I wasn't aware that it was a potential third transfer back to Fulham.
No offense, but no thanks. I'm done.
No thanks. Guys, I will tell you one thing. If there are two words I wish could be taken out of the English vocabulary right now, fine margins, I want to retire, because if I hear that one more time, I think I'm going to get sick to my stomach. I just mentioned it. I got so tired of hearing those two words together. It's funny. Mike Gregg just mentioned it, I believe, on our last show, because we were talking a little bit about Parker, and I've heard other people still mention it, like fine margins. I'm like, you know what? Enough. I don't want to hear about fine margins anymore. I'll take Marco Silva 10 out of 10 times over Scott Parker. But as a player, the move, I think, maybe it's a wash. Maybe, they got the money, but he was past his prime, as Elton said, but he did help us. So I can't fault him for that. He was with Fulham for a while and then came back as a manager. I just hated the style of play, and best of luck to him. Let's move on. I don't want to talk about Scott Parker anymore. I'm going to talk about one that hurts for me personally, someone that I wanted Fulham to keep, and there was no way that they could keep him because there was a release clause, guys. Elton, I'll go back to you. Moussa Dembele. So this is a player that I think him leaving affected Fulham for years to come. I think this one really hurts. Definitely, in my opinion, Spurs won the deal here. They got a fantastic player. It took him a little bit to get accepted with Spurs, but this one hurts. Elton, your thoughts about Moussa Dembele?
I'm going to say, like your Danny Murphy, probably one of my favorite players ever at Fulham to watch. Silky smooth, seemed like he had the ball on a string. There was almost a Messi-like quality about his ball control, the way he would move in and out and just retain the control of the ball. He was a great player, and I was pretty unhappy when we lost him. In Spurs definitely won the deal.
They absolutely did, and this one really, I think, just like I said, Jack, for me, affected Fulham for years to come, because they actually, if I remember correctly, they could not find the right role for Dembele. They eventually found him in central midfield, and he thrived in it. And then the minute he started really become the player that we hoped that he would become, Spurs come in to take on the release clause, and he's gone. And I'm telling you, I don't think Fulham recovered from it, Jack.
Yeah, I agree. The breakup of that squad where Dembele, Dempsey, those guys all left at the same time. You're right, we didn't recover from that. Dembele was probably one of the most talented players, I think, to come through that Fulham for the last 50 years, possibly, in terms of just pure ability and skill. And I don't know if you've heard quite a few people who played with him at all the clubs he's played at. They say, who's the best player you've ever played with? And they all say Moussa Dembele. He was a different class. And I remember the goal he scored against Spurs. And I think if he hadn't scored that, Spurs probably wouldn't have picked him up, and it might have been a very different story. But we lost that. That was a huge one in terms of Fulham in general, not just in transfers just to Tottenham, but
Yes.
transfers out of Fulham. That one really hurt. I remember it well. That hurt.
Yeah, it really did, and that's why Spurs definitely won the deal. And like I mentioned, it's funny because I would go on Twitter, and I would always follow the former Fulham players to see what the Spurs supporters were saying about them. And they were not convinced at the beginning, like all former Fulham players that we're going to talk about. It took them a while to accept Dembele, to accept Dempsey, and I'm going to say right now, I don't think they've accepted Ryan Sessegnon. We'll talk about him at the very end. But for me, this one just affected Fulham in a very bad way, and really, I think, started the spiral downwards. That's just the way I feel on that, and there was nothing Fulham could do about it. He had that release clause. It wasn't on them. Dembele wanted to go. I guess I can't blame him, but he comes to the club. People still think of him very fondly, which is great. So that's the only thing I will say about Dembele. All right, Jack, I'm going to come back to you, and anyone that knows me knows this gentleman brought me to Fulham Football Club. I followed him from the New England Revolution to Fulham, and of course, I follow his entire career. This one, actually, and I'm a big fan of Clint, but I will say this, I did not like the way this thing went down in the end. At Fulham, it was not good at the very end with Clint Dempsey. Obviously, he comes back on a second stint, but he wasn't the same player at that point. But this one hurts as well. As you had mentioned, Jack, it was the combination of losing Dembele and Dempsey together, both to Spurs. This one hurts. I don't know if it really worked out for him at Spurs, so I don't know who won the deal. Maybe there are no winners, but I did not like how this all ended with Clint Dempsey and Fulham the first time around, Jack.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of stuff that went on in the background there as well. We heard, I'm sure you've heard the story of Clint Dempsey punching a window out at the Cottage when he found out he was dropped for a game, and like you said, I think you're probably right that there might not have been a winner here. I think we got the best years out of Dempsey at Fulham, and he probably wasn't the same player when he went to Tottenham. I know he didn't perform quite in the same way that he did at Fulham when he moved to Spurs. So it is really tough to say who got the best. Maybe we actually got a fair amount for him at that time.
Yeah.
And so we did win the deal possibly. I think it's right on the fence of 50-50 there. But yeah, like I said before, that combination of Dempsey and Dembele both leaving, that was sort of the core of the midfield, where if you kept that together and kicked on, it could have been something special. But losing them both to Spurs, that hurt. And like you said beforehand, there's this animosity almost towards Spurs, and some of it stems back to some of these deals back in the past, you have to say.
It does for me, guys. It definitely does. I have my other issues with Tottenham Hotspur. I have a lot of Spurs supporters that I'm friends with, and I have a lot of respect for them. But this one is where it really hurts hard. And, I understand it. They took two of our players, and, best of luck to them and how they played for Tottenham Hotspur. But it really hurt Fulham. It really did as well. And that's going to lead to the last one, the current one. Elton, I'll go to you first. This one is hard because I could see Ryan being an elite player in the world, and I don't think it's worked out for him. I think if I'm going to talk about who won the deal, I'm going to say right now the biggest loser in the deal is Ryan Sessegnon, because I don't think Ryan Sessegnon's game has improved in his time at Tottenham Hotspur. So for whatever reason, the change of managers, all the managers that have come through there, Jose Mourinho, and I kept hearing from Tottenham supporters about, oh, it's great because he's going to play for Pochettino and all this. Well, Pochettino didn't last. He left. So Ryan's game has not improved. Fulham got a decent amount of money, so I'm thinking Fulham are the winner here, but it's unfortunate because I want to see Ryan play well. So your thoughts on the Ryan Sessegnon deal to Tottenham Hotspur and where it stands now?
Look, I think there's a common theme, not developing, a common theme that's always been and probably will always be, given just where we sit in the scheme of things. Where we have a good youth system, we develop players, but because we're so often in a position where we're trying to survive in the Premier League, we can't develop players, we can't bring them on because we have to depend on more experienced players. The players feel like they aren't getting a go, and when the opportunity comes, they want to move to bigger clubs. They move to bigger clubs. They don't have the respect. They don't make an impact. Their careers often don't kick off, and on it goes. I mean, are we seeing that again at Liverpool, Cavallero? And I guess it's not that surprising. But back to Sessegnon, what a disappointment it was to lose him. Such an exciting player. It felt like he was just getting going.
Yeah, exactly.
And we love Anthony Robinson, but is Sessegnon the real deal? In terms of that left wing back.
Oh,
he's such an exciting player. I was just watching some highlights earlier, actually, just ahead of our conversation, and in the Arsenal game, he's a great footballer. Which wouldn't we love to have him right now? But coming back to your question, who won? Okay, we got the money, like you said. But why isn't he playing for England? Why isn't he, a real part of that team?
That's kind of where I'm going on this, Elton, because I expected all of that for him. I expected him, if you go back to before he left Fulham, I thought he was going to be in the World Cup for England. I thought he was going to be a special player, and it just hasn't turned out that way for him. And I think maybe all the change of managers and not really developing. I'm glad that you brought this back, Elton, because when I look at the situation with Fabio, I feel like I'm seeing a little bit deja vu here. Because Fabio, I think, has maybe the same or maybe even a little better ability than Ryan, and he's not getting a chance to play regularly. And I keep hearing the same thing from Liverpool supporters. Well, he's with Klopp. He's playing with better players. They don't play with a number 10, and Fabio's a number 10. And I think he would have been better off staying at Fulham. So to your point, I think it's unfortunate what's happened with Ryan, but also, like I said, with what's going on with Fabio, it's the same thing to me.
Yeah. And, we do talk about this a lot because it's just a reflection of where Fulham are. And right now with Fulham being 6-7 in the Premier League, that's an unusual situation for us. We're actually looking like a very attractive destination from a transfer perspective, and let's stay to be part of this perspective as well. But I guess we're never going to be part of that top 6 circus. I guess, but until that happens, I think it's just people chasing the dollars, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Jack, I want to get your thoughts on all this because Ryan is a player that I loved at Fulham Football Club. But what's interesting about it, and this is also part of the story, in his time at Spurs, I think that the supporters there were just so wanting the deal to happen because it was in the newspapers and in the media for at least a couple of years. And they just wanted to win the deal. They wanted the player, right? And I knew they weren't getting the player that they were hoping, meaning that they wanted a player that would take other players on. And at that time, that was not Ryan's game. Ryan was more of a cerebral player, always showed up at the right time. So their expectations of Ryan Sessegnon were different than what we knew as Fulham supporters. And I just wanted them to give him a chance. And to be honest with you, if you go on Twitter with all this stuff about Ryan Sessegnon, I would say the majority of it is not positive. So your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I mean, first things first, Sessegnon, he's only 22. He left Fulham at 19. He played 4 seasons at Fulham. He left by the time he was 19. We got 25 million for a 19-year-old at the time. That is a really good deal. I think the problem with Spurs, they'd had Gareth Bale, and they were looking for this great left back who could turn into a left winger and bomb down the wing and just be this, once in a generation player who'll lead them to glory. They saw Sessegnon in the Championship banging in goals. I can't remember how many he scored that season, but it was like 12 maybe from effectively playing at left back. He was always in the right position at the right time, finished really well. Spurs, like you said, their eyes lit up when they saw a player like that. But again, I think they expected him to be a left winger, and they've been playing him at left wing, and really he's a left back who pushes forward a bit. He's not a left winger, and so he's not developed properly in that position. But again, he's only 22. Give him 4 more years, he's 26. Like, he's still so young. He's got his prime ahead of him. So,
Right.
If he has 3 or 4 good years, finds the right manager, comes into Spurs, because as Kamal says there, Conte is probably on the way out at the end of the season. If you get the right manager on Sessegnon, he could turn into that world-class player. So I really think it's too hard to make a call 100% on who wins this deal. I'd say come back in 2 years' time and we'll see then, because he's either going to have completely flopped and dropped out of the side and moved on, or he's going to find the right manager and totally kick on and be a world beater and be playing for England.
Yeah, it's something that I'm glad that we're talking about, the fact that he's only 22, Jack. There's still a lot of time to develop. And it's funny, we're talking about Clint Dempsey. Clint Dempsey came to Fulham, I want to say at 26 or 27 in his prime. We got him in his prime. Yeah. And so I think that we judge players, especially when they're young, maybe a little bit harshly and don't give them the time to develop. And he just hasn't developed yet. Maybe with the right manager, the right situation, Ryan Sessegnon could become the player that Elton, you were hoping he would become. His story's not totally written off yet. He still has time. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but I think I think what we're discussing is the group lament that we can't seem to hang on to players for long enough for them to develop and prove themselves at Fulham.
Right.
We're the club who we breed good youngsters. They often leave before they get a chance to play first team football at Fulham, or a lot of it. And then we're always looking to shore up the team with experienced, proven players. But wouldn't it have been amazing for him to be given the right contract at Fulham, spend 2 or 3 years imagine if he'd had played regularly for Fulham over the last 3 years,
right,
for everything that's happened, and under Mark, culminating in an involvement in this squad. I don't know what he'd be worth. Maybe he still wouldn't be worth more than 25 million, because that's a lot of money for that sort of player.
But we wouldn't have had Willian.
Yeah, okay. But in terms of his personal development, what he could have been for Fulham and what he may have kicked on to be, I think the move was premature. And it's always going to be difficult. You move to a big team, you're on a rotation, there's so much depth. How can you, as a 19-year-old, suddenly break in and be a starter every week? Sure, it can happen, but it's very rare.
Right. Right. And I'll end this and then we'll talk about the actual match. And just think about this, Elton, and I'll leave that with you as well, Jack, in just a second. Imagine if Ryan and Fabio and Harvey Elliott all stayed at Fulham. And maybe where would their careers be different? We'll never know, right? But would they have developed more if they all stayed at Fulham, Elton? Am I wrong to even suggest that? Would they be different, or is it just it was their time and they wanted to move on? I guess we'll never know, but I have a feeling that potentially their games would develop more if they all stayed. Maybe I'm just being a Fulham supporter. We'll never know.
Well, we will never know, but you have to believe that they would have got more first-team football. Okay? Maybe they wouldn't be playing you know, with Jurgen Klopp and that team of brilliant footballers, but training with world-class footballers is not the same as being part of that starting lineup every week. It's not the same.
Yep.
And I think what you learn as part of a team that develops a culture and moves forward and actually achieves success and does some amazing things is perhaps equally important to your career development. But it's always going to be that way. How could we ever have hung on to those three players, given what Fulham's? Perhaps we're forgetting what we've just been through over the last 3 years, guys. You know, it's been pretty
True.
tough times. It's been very emotional and very up and down. Yeah. We're doing great right now, and we're not. I wouldn't say we're coasting, but we're pretty comfortable. And we're wondering how Harvey Elliott might be able to be spliced into his team. Wouldn't that be great? But it's all timing, isn't it? It's all timing, and it just was never going to happen.
It is, and I know, like I said, it's wishful thinking to talk about Harvey Elliott, Fabio Carvalho, and then, of course, Ryan all being with Fulham, but that's just not realistic, Jack.
Well, you're right, but I'd even take that further and think about the original Moussa Dembele, the youth player who ended up at Marseille, Matt O'Reilly, Luca De La Torre.
There's so many of them.
Patrick Roberts. You know, we've created enough very, very top quality youth players to be like a very heady Premier League team, like very solid Premier League, mid to higher mid table with that group of players. We're really missing. And Steve Reynolds, the comment that you put up on there as well about not tying these players down, we do have an issue there where we're not tying these young guys down to decent contracts. And I know there's obviously an economic side to it all where we're making sure that we're not, exposing ourselves too much in terms of wages to young players who might not turn out to be world beaters. But if we had kept all those guys together, we would have this young squad of under 25s who would be, world beaters if they got the right manager. But, it is, you can't predict the future on those kind of things, and you have to take good deals when they come. And you have to, unfortunately, let players like Harvey Elliott go for pennies when you don't want to, because that's just the way the system works.
Right.
So I think there's things we could definitely improve on, but it's tough. Football's a business at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I'm going to share one more question before we do our preview. This is from Kamal. Here's a question. Are the Cons selling types, or do they want to raise the quality standards of the team? Example, they've signed Paulinho for 6 years to make him more of an asset in long term. Have we changed? Elton, this is a great question and something that I definitely want to talk more about on Cottage Talk moving forward. Have the Cons changed? Has the Riverside stand? In my theory on this is that they believe the Riverside stand will allow them to compete in the Premier League more than in years past with the revenue that they can make from. They'll never have 50,000 in the stands, but that stand with everything that comes with it, in their minds, they might think we can compete. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's a really great question, actually. And look, are the Cons selling types? I think the Cons. This is not what's an adornment of a wealthy man who happens to love football. The Cons are businessmen. They're in the business of sports. They've got 3 franchises. It's about making money, however passionate they may be about match day. It's a money-making affair, right?
Right.
Have they changed? And again, we talk about this a lot, and I think what has changed is that I think for the first time in their tenure, they've gelled with a manager they actually trust, and who's not only had a plan but has delivered.
Exactly.
And so that it's easy to blame the board. It's easy to blame the executive management if the team and the manager aren't delivering, right? Because they can have a plan and they can have a view of how they want to do things. And I just see, I don't know the detail, but I sense that there's a degree of trust. we never hear Marco really. I mean, he has whinged from time to time about deals not being done early enough in transfer windows.
Right.
But I think by and large, he has been reasonably successful in getting, if not the players he wanted, positions he wanted covered. Right. If you look at the Polina deal, it's clearly a Marco deal. It's a Portuguese deal. He obviously knows the player. The guys he's brought in, I mean, there's a Portuguese and a Brazilian theme and to it all.
Yeah.
And we love that, and we're very happy about that. So back to your question, have the Khans fallen in love with Fulham long term, or is this just part of their process to increase the asset value of their London franchise? Look, I think it's a bit of both. I think Tony Khan seems to be a pretty passionate guy. I'm sure his Thanksgiving dinners with his family are now more comfortable since he's making good on the £100 million loss from a couple of years ago. But, you know, I think surely Fulham as an asset is always for sale. Okay. And if someone came along and offered them a stupid price, I'm sure they sell us.
Interesting. Very interesting there, Jack. What are your thoughts on this? And it's something that, like I said, I know that you guys have talked a great deal about the Khans, and question is, have they changed? But Elton just brought up a good point. It's still a business. They treat it like a business. They should treat it like a business. They might be passionate about it, but it's still a business. So your thoughts on this?
It's an interesting one again because you know, is it 7 years they've owned us? Maybe longer now.
Longer.
Yeah. They've made mistakes along the way, but I think they're showing that they're good business people by learning from those mistakes as well. Right. You talk about when we came up and spent 100 mil, it completely failed. You know, they learned from that and they didn't do the same thing again. And they went, right, let's find a different manager. Let's go up in a different way. Let's build a different team and let's do things completely differently the next time around. And like I said, they've made mistakes, but they're definitely a lot smarter in the transfer market, especially. And I think that probably took, because I know Tony Khan does have quite a lot of involvement in the transfer side of the business. He's come to the fore this last year. If you look at the deals for Leno, you look at the Palhinha deal, you look at all our transfer business that's come in this season, and it's mind-blowing. And, you know, it gets shouted out on Twitter fairly regularly. Bernd Leno only cost Fulham $3 million.
Unbelievable.
Palhinha is, you know, one of the best players in the league this season, only cost Fulham $20 million. He's an £80 million player easily. So you have to say they're, in a way, I don't think they're selling types, but it is a business and it's all economic at the end of the day, and they're buying players who they're getting really good value for. So are we a selling team still, or a selling club rather? I don't think so, but I think we're being a lot smarter with the players we buy and making sure there's really good value there before we actually dive into a deal.
See, I totally agree with that, Jack. Very good from both of you on this. And big thing that come out of this when it comes to the Khans is, and I'm glad that Elton brought this up. Well, both of you brought this up. The $100 million that was basically just thrown down the toilet. It just didn't work. And it took them a while to figure out how they can recover from it, learn from their mistakes, and now they bounce back. But to Elton's point, I'm glad that you said this, Elton. I think it also is this marriage, and I'll call it what it is, with Marco Silva and the Khans right now. It's working, and I hope it's long-term. I hope they sign him long-term because they could really build something if they can keep Marco in place. But I think it's a combination of learning from their mistakes and finding a manager that they can trust, that they can build around, as Elton said. So great stuff. Fantastic stuff. As we said, guys, you know, I had hoped to do about a half hour to 45 minutes. I think we're going to go an hour as we thought we might end up going, just because the conversation's been good. But coming up next,
let's make it two.
No, I can't go two. I can't go two. But coming up next, guys, we're going to end the show by previewing the upcoming match against Tottenham Hotspur. Okay, guys, I'd say for about 15 minutes, let's talk about this upcoming match with Tottenham Hotspur. Elton, I'll go to you first. Overall, just your thoughts on Tottenham Hotspur and the situation they're in.
Well, they must be somewhat, I don't know, disappointed, frustrated in their last outing against Arsenal. Well, I guess they were out of the game and then they came back in, but they don't look like a top 2 side right now. If I compare them to Arsenal and Man City, I guess individually there's some absolutely brilliant players in the squad, and individually at different times they're firing, but the unit is not firing. And I don't know. Maybe I'm not the smartest guy in the room to put my finger on why it's not working. Some might say they've got a wingback problem. I've read some stuff that suggest the format that they play and what is expected of their wingbacks to push forward. We were having a conversation about Sessegnon. Actually leaves their midfield exposed to an overload, and they're not actually performing in midfield. And I wonder if that's something that we're going to try and exploit.
Great point. That's a great point. And it's funny because I've been watching and reading stuff as well, and that could be where Fulham could take advantage. I'm glad that we're talking about this, and very interesting. Over to you, Jack. What are your thoughts on Tottenham ahead of this match?
Yeah, I mean, for me at the moment, we sort of split the season into 2, the pre-World Cup and post-World Cup. And pre-World Cup Spurs were, looking okay. I mean, they're sitting 5th in the league at the moment. So they've obviously not had a terrible season. You can't be sitting there in the top 6 and thinking that you've had a bad season. But since coming back from the World Cup, I think they've only picked up 4 points. They had the 2-2 draw with Brentford and they flogged Palace, but we know that Palace are not a very strong side at the moment. So admittedly, they've had a couple of tough games, but they just look off the boil at the moment. And I think, as you mentioned, the system that they play is a strange one where they play 3 at the back, and those 3 defenders, usually Dyer, Romero, and Davis, they're not the strongest defenders. The 2 wing-backs, Perisic and I think Emerson Royal usually plays on the right. They're good players, but I'd say they're more attacking-minded. And then you've got Bentancur, Højbjerg in the middle, decent midfielders, but it's very attacking, that side. And so they really do leave themselves very open to the counter. And I think we've been really good on the counter this season as well. But, when you're playing, you've got to have Son and Kulusevski basically dropping back to support the midfield, and they don't do that. They're not those kind of players. And so we'll find gaps. I'm sure we will. They're singularity in terms of each individual player, they're very talented as a squad, but I think there's ways that we can exploit them, and I think Silva's a good enough manager to exploit them, because you see when they come up against a well-organised team, they struggle, and we are a very well-organised team.
Great point. Fantastic point. Over to you, Elton. Key players for Fulham, because we're already getting into how Fulham could potentially win this match. That'll be our next topic, but who has to play at an elite level? I'm going to throw my hand up and say Palhinha has to have a great match here. But your thoughts?
Oh, undoubtedly. And I think Pereira as well, he's going to be really important. Harrison Reed is part of the Palhinha partnership. But one of the things I think I really don't want to see happen here is Mitro gets stranded with a big dogfight in midfield and us trying to dominate, but actually not linking up with him. And I don't know, I guess, how we do that successfully without losing Mitro as that target man as well up front, right?
Right.
I feel like Anthony Robinson is going to be important. We missed him. I mean, Kurzawa did a good job for us. I think he was pretty good last week, but we really missed
Absolutely.
Robinson's attacking presence and his link up with Willian. And Willian's obviously been so outstanding, but not only as an individual. It is the link up that's working so well. And I just love the way that you see Robinson come out of defence, carry the ball. There's a little interchange between Willian and the ball's knocked square in the middle, and Pereira's always there. And off we go, and we transition so quickly. And I think if we can do that again, all bets are off. I mean, obviously, if the ball's delivered to Son and Kane and co, that is devastating. Watching those guys, they're like white pointers. They're so dangerous.
Yeah,
and they move so quickly and so powerfully. So, look, I as Jack said about the sort of season of two halves, I really feel like last time we played Spurs, we were just finding ourselves. We were finding our feet for what we have become. And we talk a lot about how I really believe that not just with hubris and overconfidence, I think this squad really does fear nobody. And I think they believe, there's a real belief, not a childish or sort of, not a childish belief, but a genuine belief by doing and actually achieving that we can get points and get 3 points from anyone.
I totally agree with that. And it's not arrogance, it's confidence, and it's a belief. It's fearing no one. They don't fear anyone, including Man City. When I saw that they didn't even fear Man City, I'm thinking, okay, they're in this. It's part of the belief that Marco has instilled in them. Very good stuff there. Elton, over to you, Jack. I want to move on. Let's talk about, because Elton already mentioned key players. So let's talk about, how does Fulham win this match? We've already talked a little bit about that. So your thoughts on what Fulham need to do to set up to beat Spurs? I think that they can do it. What do they need to do?
Well, I'll sort of go off the back of Elton's points there as well, by the fact that I think our key players effectively are going to be the defenders. I think Leno has to have a ripper game, and Ream, Diop, Tosin, whichever two actually end up starting, I think that's going to be key, because like you said, Son, Kane, Kulusevski, they're seriously world-class finishers. If you give them a chance, they're going to put the ball away. So the way we win this match is by locking them out. I don't think Spurs defensively are anything to worry about, personally. When you've got Mitra up front, and then the way Pereira, Willian, BDR are playing at the moment, I would back them to put goals past anyone in the league at the moment. So I think the key to winning this game is our defence stepping up and making sure we keep a clean sheet. I think it's going to be tough for us to score 2 goals against top sides. So I can see the 1 goal being so key here, and we need a clean sheet to win this game. I think that's the way it's going to go.
Okay.
Over to you, just score a penalty.
That would be nice.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, that's another podcast.
Yeah, that's a podcast in itself. It's funny. I had on Peter Rutzler on Friday, and we just ran out of time. One of the questions I wanted to talk to him about was the situation with Mitro taking penalties. We just didn't have enough time. Like I said, the 3 of us could talk for an hour on that, but we just don't have the time for that. But yeah. Elton, before we go to the starting 11 and prediction, your thoughts on what Jack just shared about how Fulham win this match. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I actually do. And by and large, our defense really has matured into something that is highly dependable. I like what's happening with the Diop Tosin thing. We're not quite sure if it's strictly rotation or highly tactical, but I think Marco is getting it right. And I think the competition for that position is actually making Tosin more mindful and less accident prone and more focused. That's a big call, I know,
Yeah.
but I do. I'm pretty vocal about Tosin just having those forgetful moments where he seems to just drift out of the game, and I feel like that's improving a lot, and maybe it's because he knows he can't screw up and he's fighting for a position there, and Diop is a very, very capable replacement for him. And Marcus showed that there are no friends in the dressing room,
Yep.
and the right man gets the job, and the right man for the right situation gets the job. So I don't believe it's a rotation. Kenny Tete having a blinder of a season, man on man. Is anyone doing better than Kenny Tete?
It's playing great.
Yeah, and obviously a lot's been said about Anthony Robinson, and he's been a revelation this year. So I coming back to your question, I think Jack is right. I've missed Leno in that group, which is highly unfair because he's been incredible.
Steal of the season.
And he's
100%.
been the unmentioned man of the match in so many games. He's been incredible. So yeah, and obviously how those guys link up with our defensive midfielders as well has been terrific to watch. So I think it's all about that, and if that works really well for us, then I think we're in a really good position.
Okay, excellent. All right, guys, I'm going to share the starting 11 that I just shared on a Tottenham video cast. And then if you feel any different on the starting 11, say what you would do. So this is what I'm going to go for starting 11, Jack, and then I'll go to you, and then I'll go to Ellen, and then we'll finish with our prediction for the match. So I had Leno, Tete. Obviously, I had Anthony Robinson. The midfield three picks itself of Polina, Reed, and Pereira. This is where it might get a little bit different from the two of you. I had Willian and BDR on the right, and then I had Mitro up front. Jack, I'll go to you first. Would you do anything different there? Oh, I'm sorry, Diop and Reem. Diop and Reem, sorry.
Diop and Reem. No, that's exactly. I think that's our strongest starting lineup. The only possibility of a change there, and I don't think it'll happen, would be to bring in Manor Solomon for BDR. I think that's the only potential change I'd make, just for something a bit different, because I think BDR can be brought on later in the game as a utility player. If we want to shore up defensively, we can bring him on. If we want to push forward in a more attacking sense, we can bring him on as well. But again, I think realistically, we're going to go with a safe option, which is BDR on the right. He's had such a great season. Yep. I can't see any other choice but him.
Okay, excellent. Elton, your thoughts? That was a Goldman. I completely forgot the center backs. That's crazy. But your thoughts about this, because this is something, as you were mentioning, this rotation. Is it a rotation? Is it by opponent? Very interesting about the center back position. Would you change anything from the starting 11 I came up with?
No, I wouldn't. And I would be very happy to see Diop start. It's interesting. We had a conversation talking about, does Diop, when Robinson was missing last week, we thought that may have had an influence on Diop starting because Robinson wasn't there as part of the back four. But obviously Robinson plays this week, barring anything unforeseen. The thing about Manor Solomon, I think it just hasn't unfolded in a way that he's got enough minutes. He seems fit. He seems pretty sharp. He looks great. He looks really good, but he's clearly hasn't got enough minutes yet and match fitness, surely, to roll the dice and bring him out for such a big game. Look, if we were playing Wolves, maybe he'd start, all right? But against Spurs, could you do it? I think that's too risky. But, in the last couple of games, we've both felt that, all three of us have felt, maybe this is the time to give Solomon, 20, 30 minutes
Yeah,
to
I agree
really
with
have
that.
an impact on the game and really, really rip it open and stretch the defenders, because he looks a real talent, and we just haven't seen it yet.
Right. And that's great that you guys are talking about Manor Solomon, because I think that he's going to be a difference maker. And the injury just really just affected probably Marco's plans with him. And so for me, I'm looking forward to that time. But Elton, I think you bring up a good point. I don't know if you risk it against Spurs. I think you play BDR because you can count on him. That's the one great thing about Bobby Decordova-Reid. He might not be the best at any position, but he gives you everything that he has every time he plays. And you can count on him. You can count on Bobby Decordova-Reid. In this match, I go with someone that I count on. I'm with you guys on Bobby Decordova-Reid. Okay. Well, guys, like I mentioned, we did pretty much go an hour here. Let's go to prediction to end the show. Jack, I'll give you first crack at this.
I'll go 1-0. Harrison Reed with the goal.
Harrison Reed, I love it.
Why not? He's scored 2 already. Make it 3. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it's going to be tight. And I hope this is the game where we give a team in the top 6 another really good run. I always feel like it's tough at the moment because we beat Chelsea and people go, oh, well, Chelsea are shit at the moment, so it doesn't mean anything. And then we'll beat Spurs and they'll say, oh, well, they just got flogged as well a couple of times, so it doesn't mean anything. I'm hoping this is the game where we really impose ourselves and really prove that we're better than some of those teams in the top 6. And I think it will be. And I think we'll quite comfortably win 1-0 here, and I think we'll keep them out.
Okay, excellent. All right. Over to you, Elton. What's your prediction?
I'm feeling enormous pressure to be different and to actually bring something different here. But I am in the lower part of my abdomen. I am feeling 1-0, but it might just be a 1-1 draw. But hey, sidebar here. I saw a rear shot. It's got nothing to do with prediction, but I just thought I'd mention it. I saw a rear shot at Hotspur Park of someone who we have great affection for, Niskan Scambano, on a cycling machine. And my heart kind of went out to him that, he was having such a great season and this has really kicked on and we're having all the success. And I feel so sorry for him that he's not part of it.
That's a great point. It's someone that has given, we're talking about Bobby Decordova-Reid, Niskan Scambano's given you everything that he could possibly give you and has only improved in his time. Finally got to show itself last season. And now this season, then he gets injured. Very good point. So, back over to you, Elton. You're going 1-0?
I'm going to 1-1 draw.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1-0. You're going to go for the 1-1. Okay. I understand that. I understand that. Before I give my predictions, I'm going to go here to some predictions at the phone supporters. Julian Newton's going 2-1. Kamal says 2-0. I'll take that all day. Dean's going 2-1 to Fulham. Come on. Okay. And I already told you guys my predictions, 2-1. I understand why Jack and also Elton, you're saying either 1-1 or 1-0 because it could be difficult to score. But I don't know why. I have a feeling Fulham might score a couple goals here. As Jack said, I think they're susceptible defensively. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm going 2-1, but we'll see what happens. And just to tick off my friend Emil Danilo, the Fulham shadow, I'm going to say 2 goals from Harrison Reed. That would really tick him off. So I'm going 2 goals. It's just not his player. He's just not a fan of Harrison Reed. I could do a show on why Emilio doesn't like Harrison Reed. But regardless, guys, we do have to wrap this up. It's been an hour, and I told you guys like maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jack. Thank you so much for, on short notice, coming on the show today.
No, it's no worries at all, Russ. And we look forward to doing it again. And yeah, like you said at the start, it'd be great if anyone is looking for more Fulham content.
Yes.
Make sure you get on, subscribe to That So Craven. We're still fresh, but we'd love to get a few more listeners, and hopefully people can keep supporting us.
Yes, I'm glad that you said that. I was going to say that as well. Please do subscribe to That So Craven on Apple Podcasts. That's how I listen to it. There are so many places to listen to the show. I would highly recommend it. It's a great show and just another wonderful podcast. That's Talking Fulham, Elton. So thank you so much for joining me, as I said to Jack, on such short notice.
Pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting us, Russ. Really good to chat about all things Fulham. Really good.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. One last time, please do subscribe to That's So Craven. Wonderful podcast. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. For Jack and Elton from That's So Craven, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, now part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.